If you own a property in Spain or indeed anywhere in the EU, or you're thinking about buying one, there's something critical that you need to know. Major changes to property laws are on the horizon and they will impact the value and saleability of properties. As we will see in this video, if you get ahead of the curve, then you could stand to gain from these changes. But ignore them and the value of your home could take a big hit. At the heart of these changes is the EU's Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, or the EPBD. It's an ambitious piece of European legislation designed to drastically reduce carbon emissions from buildings, helping push the EU towards zero emissions by 2050. Their reasoning for these changes is that buildings currently account for nearly 40% of Europe's energy use, and a large proportion of that demand is met by burning fossil fuels. The directive sets out to cut that dramatically. It's not just about fighting climate change, but also to improve energy security. A large proportion of these fossil fuels are imported from outside the EU. Also, by increasing the energy efficiency of households, the directive aims to lower everybody's energy bills. And with all the work that will need to be done to enable households to reach these new targets, it aims to create thousands of new jobs in the renovation and green tech sectors. 2050 may seem a long way away, but the impacts and requirements of this will start hitting property markets and homeowners long before then. Spain, along with every EU member country, must incorporate these new rules into national law by May 2026. And I expect we're going to start seeing new obligations placed on homeowners as soon as that happens. So what exactly is this directive all about, and what does it mean for you and your property? Well, in this video, I'm going to take a deep dive into the directive and explain everything that you need to know. Now, of course, this channel is all about Spain and Spanish property, and so I'm going to talk about all of this in that context. But wherever you own or plan to own property in the EU, this directive applies and will have a similar effect. So it's worth watching it through to the end. Now, firstly, let's look at the targets that the directive sets. If you follow property news, you've probably seen some alarming headlines like, by 2030, Spain will ban selling and renting homes below EPC rating E and D by 2033. I've reported on this, as did several other media sources. By the way, if you're not sure what an EPC or Energy Performance Certificate is, check out the link in the description. There's a video explaining that on my website. Now, here's the thing. These dramatic headlines were based on an earlier draft version of the directive, and, well, really, they oversimplify what needs to be achieved. The final directive wording isn't quite so black and white, but as we're going to see, its effect and impact could be just as significant. Rather than tying obligations directly to EPC bans, the directive sets energy saving targets. It requires member states to achieve a 16% cut in average primary energy use of residential buildings by 2030, and then a 20 to 22% cut by 2035. And at least 55% of these savings have to come from renovating the 43% worst performing buildings. So what does that actually mean? Well, in Spain, at least 30% of residential buildings are rated F or G on the current EPC scale, and the remaining chunk of those worst performing buildings will make up most of the E-rated buildings as well. If my estimations are correct, Spain will need to upgrade approximately 40 to 45% of properties currently rated E, F or G to at least D by 2030 and up to 60% by 2035. That's a far greater number than the average amount of properties which are sold or rented in a 10-year period. In practice, this means millions of properties, and all of the current worst performing properties being sold or rented will need to be significantly upgraded in the coming years if Spain's to hit that EU target. So even though the wording of the directive has changed, its real world effects remain similar to those dramatic headlines you've seen. Now, there is some good news though. You're not expected to tackle these changes alone. The EPBD includes significant support to help you improve your home's energy performance. Governments are required to provide grants and subsidies for renovation work. They're expected to work with the banking sector to ensure the provision of green loans and mortgages to help with renovations and to incentivise the purchase of energy efficient properties. They need to provide tax incentives to promote energy saving renovations, basically so that landlords can claim costs back against income tax rather than from their tenants. The EU itself is putting huge funds behind this renovation drive, and bear in mind, in most cases the funds will be available to all homeowners, not just residents. Now, I plan to make more videos on this subject, including detailed videos about funding as and when it becomes available, so please do like and subscribe if you want to see those updates. Now, beyond money, there will also be practical help made available. Governments across the EU will have to set up one-stop shops. Now, these centres will offer expert advice about the whole renovation process, guiding you through all of the technical options and helping connect you with trained professionals, and also advise on the funding, grants and finance, all under one roof. There's going to be a lot of these one-stop shops, with at least one per 80,000 people. And to help achieve all of this, the governments must invest in the training of a workforce, focusing that training on small and medium-sized enterprises and micro enterprises, so helping spread all of this investment as widely as possible, creating an economic stimulus throughout the EU. So while the changes might seem daunting at first, the support systems are being created to help make your transition smooth, both technically and financially. However, with such big targets to hit, incentives alone are not going to be enough. So the directive also creates penalties. The penalties are centered around a new concept called Minimum Energy Performance Standards, MEPS. The directive gives each country the power to decide exactly how to set and enforce these MEPS. It simply states that the penalties must be effective, proportionate and dissuasive, but it clearly explains that they should kick in at key moments known as trigger points. These trigger points include key legal transactions, such as when a property is sold, rented out, donated, or officially changed in use. So in short, when a property changes hands or purpose, it may have to meet these minimum energy performance standards or have a plan in place to reach them within a specific time frame. So think of MEPS as a kind of energy MOT for buildings. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, in the UK, an MOT is a safety certificate that a car must have in order to be driven on the road, much like the ETV in Spain or the TÜV in Germany. Now, I think one of the important questions to answer at this point is, could the government block the sale or rental of properties which don't reach minimum energy performance standards? Now, for rental, that is an easy answer. Yes, and they almost definitely will. This has already been done in Germany, France, Sweden and Ireland, so expect higher energy standards for new rental leases. Blocking the sale of properties sounds like a new draconian law, but there's nothing new about it. It's already a legal requirement in Spain and in many other countries to have certain paperwork in place before a change of ownership of a property can be registered. Habitation certificates and EPCs are an obvious example of this legal mechanism in Spanish law, so it's within the scope of the directive and law to do this. Now, of course, we're going to have to see how Spain and the other member states choose to set their laws and policies to be certain of this, but I don't think that it will just be as simple as banning sales of properties which fall below a certain standard, and let me explain why. The directive also introduces renovation passports. Now, think of a renovation passport as a cross between a roadmap showing exactly what upgrades a home needs in order to hit Europe's minimum energy standards, and a service history showing what has already been achieved to date. Drawn up by a qualified energy expert, the passport will list the specific upgrades that a home needs in order to reach minimum energy performance standards. It breaks down all the complex renovations into clear phases: insulation, heating, windows, renewables, etc., so that the owner knows exactly what comes next on the road, not just to 2030, but all the way up to achieving zero emissions by 2050. Now, along with showing what needs to be done, the passports will also unlock tailored financing packages, green loans, grants and subsidies, because the lenders and agencies will be expected to trust that step-by-step plan. It removes guesswork about what qualifies for support or special mortgage terms. The passports will tie into a digital logbook, an ongoing record of past upgrade certificates and performance data, so that every future owner inherits a transparent renovation history of the property. Now, importantly, the directive allows for member states to make these passports compulsory for major renovations or market transactions, again, anchoring renovation schedules to property sales or leases. It seems likely to me that when Spain transposes the EPD into Spanish law, rather than banning sales outright, they might require an up-to-date renovation passport for a transfer of property ownership to be registered, just as they currently require EPCs and habitation certificates. If the property doesn't meet the current target set in that passport, well, they could perhaps impose a legal obligation on the new owner to catch up, or impose penalties along with the sale. Alternatively, they might simply rely upon market forces. A car with no MOT and no service history that's scheduled to need an expensive service in the near future is less valuable than the same car with a new MOT in place, a full service history and confirmation that that expensive service has already been done. And the same would end up applying to properties. The market value of properties which are up to date with their renovation passports and have had those expensive upgrades done will be greater than those that haven't. Now, before I move on to my summary of how I think this will impact the property market, I want to quickly talk about the exceptions to these rules. Many of you have already pointed out quite correctly that for some properties meeting these targets will be almost impossible or economically unviable, and the directive does seem to allow for this. For example, heritage buildings, buildings of particular architectural importance and buildings which are less than 50 square metres can be wholly or partially exempted from the rules. I imagine this will be assessed as part of the renovation passport process, but perhaps more importantly for Spain, where as much as 25% of the housing stock is used as second homes, exemptions can also be made for residential buildings which are used for less than 25% of the year. Now, many of you might be picturing the coastal resorts here, but the bulk of these properties are the Spanish-owned ancestral properties in villages throughout Spain that became depopulated as their residents moved to the cities seeking work. I'm planning a road trip video about this very subject soon, so please watch this space and subscribe if you want to see it. Now, later generations who have inherited their homes return here and there for weekends or in the summer. It would never be financially viable to update these properties. They're often co-owned by siblings or cousins who might not even agree on a plan of action to move forward, and investing government funds into upgrades would have far less impact on the reduction targets than focusing it on properties which are in constant use. I expect that we will see this kind of property excluded from the rules, but it brings with it a problem. Excluding these properties won't reduce the overall reduction target, it simply shifts more of the burden onto the properties that can be upgraded. Okay, so what you all want to know, how will this affect the property market? Well, firstly, expect this to hit home, pun fully intended, sooner than you might expect. The big targets you've heard about, 2030, 2033, 2035, 2050, these are for governments, not homeowners. Spain has to show the EU that it's hitting its milestones, so individual properties will face obligations much sooner, perhaps as soon as 2026, when the directive is implemented into Spanish law. Some aspects and policies may come in even sooner. Indeed, some of the incentives are already being made available. I'm going to talk about that more in future videos. If renovation passports become the preferred enforcement tool, I'll expect a rolling set of property by property deadlines, which will begin well before 2030. Also, while we might not know for sure how the Spanish government will transpose the directive into national law, or any government at that matter, we can be certain of some of the effects it will have. Whether or not bans on the registration of sales are enforced, properties which are currently in the lowest performing EPC bands and that are not brought up to minimum standards will be less attractive to buyers. Their saleability and in turn their values and even the possibility of securing mortgages against them will decrease, and their owners will find themselves in a weak position when it comes to negotiating a sale. For buyers, the flip side is available. Those who are willing to take on the challenge and the work will be able to seek out those sellers who are in a weak position, drive a hard bargain and negotiate a big discount. But right now, during this transition period, while we wait for the government to transpose this directive into Spanish law, I think buyers who are not aware that these changes are coming will be in a very vulnerable position. EPC certificates are rarely in place at the point of marketing in Spain, and worse still, they're sometimes falsely advertised. If a buyer were unwittingly to buy a property at its current market value and then in a year find that it needs huge upgrades that they didn't account for in their purchase negotiations or their budgeting, well, they'll take a hard hit when they have to undertake those renovations themselves. If you're looking for a property in Spain, check out the accompanying article to this video through the link in the description below, where I show you how you can check or estimate the EPC rating of any given property in Spain. And while you're there, please do check out my book about buying property in Spain. Just like this video, it's based on meticulous research, 20 years of industry experience and a lifetime of experience in Spain. It's not written to sell your property rather than to empower you to make accurate, informed decisions. It's been getting some great reviews from the people who've read it. If you're somebody who's written in to tell me how much it's helped you, I really do appreciate your feedback. If you're interested in a copy, there's a link in the description below. Now, I plan to return to this topic a lot over the coming months and years. There's a huge amount to consider, not just about resale properties, but new builds as well, and there's a lot that we still have to find out, so I will be keeping you updated. Please do like and subscribe if you want to see those updates, and give this video a like if you found it useful. If you have any questions, please do get involved in the comments. I would love to hear them. Also, I'd love to get some interviews with experts who are associated with this field on this channel for future videos. So if that sounds like you, drop me an email. The address is in the description. We can have a good chat about it. One last important note about the comments. Given this video contains the keywords EU, net zero and climate change, I fully expect it to attract bots, scammers and some pretty toxic comments. That's exactly what happened last time, and as a result I had to hold the comments back. If I do this again, I will be able to see the comments, but I won't be able to respond. Please be assured I read them all, and even if I can't respond, they help to form the content for future videos. But in order to make sure your comment gets noticed, if you start it by saying, "Hi James," I'll know you watched this video all the way through to the end, and I will afford you that same attention. So thank you very much for watching this video through to the end. I hope you found it useful, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.